the impact, for me, it was significantly regarding work. I mean, I wasn't not able to work for the first, well, other than like Zoom personal training, and personal training is a pretty small part of what, like my work. So I was doing maybe like 2 to 3 things over Zoom a week and then nothing else. That was probably until I think June. And then June, I was able to start doing a little bit of work at the hospital, but even that was so different than what would normally do.
So
Still the same idea, but
how is
go
that?
ahead.
How was it different?
Oh, well, it was just like the restrictions because being in the hospital in terms of what we were allowed to do, and I mean, we weren't allowed to access the fitness room that we use. We were only able to go outside, and it was always only 101, and so it just um, made things challenging. And I mean, it was challenging, um, just because everything, you know, it became not a very high priority. Let's say my work contract stuff. So communication was very challenging. Trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we need to do in order to be able to get things back going again? But and then as July kind of rolled around, and I had been looking on like Indeed and all those sorts of things. Not that it's an advertisement, but just the various things, and just keeping an eye out. And I a job came up in a couple of jobs came up in Kamloops and actually in Penticton as well, and so I threw out a few applications, and um,
So are you
I
traveling right now, sort of back and forth, or are you pretty situated, or?
no full time in Kamloops now.
Okay.
Yeah, been in Kamloops full time since the start of November, or like basically the start of November.
Okay.
And yeah, was back and forth a couple of times, a couple of days a week in Kamloops, and then 3 days a week in Penticton for work, which wasn't a lot, but more just getting things figured out there and finding a place here. So yeah, so that's a whole new thing too.
Okay.
Getting used to, and new position and new role.
And what's your new environment like for you at home and the community?
Oh well, I mean Kamloops, I'm not familiar with in terms of having lived here, but very familiar with the town. I've been coming here for a number of years, playing soccer pretty much every year since 2000. They have a big tournament here, so
Hmm.
always come, have family here. My brother's here now, or has been for about I think 4 or 5 years.
So it wasn't a very
Actually,
hard
maybe more now.
wasn't a very hard choice.
No, no, and especially the role is definitely going to be have challenges for me, just because has it's new stuff for me, from a coordinator side as opposed to a hands-on training, hands-on that kind of stuff.
Okay.
It's both, but the coordinating stuff is definitely
Is it both because you're short staffed?
no, it's always both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Um, and of course, the reason why everyone would be listening to my podcast is let's talk some kettlebells. Um, yeah, no, I just wanted to catch up with you on how your training situation is like, and I thought that specifically for this episode, getting a good idea, especially right now, the dynamic between your work schedule and your training schedule and how you're making that work, if at all, because again, like I said, we haven't really caught up much about this sort of stuff, and I generally these days stay away from Facebook a fair bit, and I know that you guys are pretty active on your Okanagan Facebook group, but I don't necessarily recall you posting a whole lot as compared to maybe years past.
No, I mean, honestly, I kind of follow the same way nowadays. I spend as little time as possible on Facebook, and I go on, I'll post some stuff, but seems like more often than not, it's like Percy pictures or whatever. um,
Everyone loves the cat photos.
yeah, exactly, and especially if he sneaks into a training video or something, right? Um, but no, I mean, personally, the whole like when the pandemic hit, it was this weird. It's too much nothing for me. My life had been for the past 10 years in these contract roles that I had. They were so set, and I had this pretty nicely set out schedule that I always knew where I could. Okay, this is where I'm going to train. This is where I'm going to train. And then and then all of a sudden I've got a ton of time on my hands, but it was just finding that time when I was going to do the training. And of course, lots of anxiety and stress around being out of work and when the heck am I going to go back to work, and how long is this thing going to go, and why aren't people getting back to me, and in terms of contract stuff. And so there was a ton of stress there. And anxiety that I felt.
How do you normally, what would you say your stress level or anxiety level is normally like before the pandemic, and how are you managing that now?
Oh, well, I mean, before I would be, there'd be stress is relatively low. Anxiety is relatively low just because I had a pretty much a set routine, and it really hadn't changed much for 10 years, going into the 11th year. And especially, there had been a lot of changes in the years previous, and things had got back to that, settled, more normalized in all life, not just work life and training. So I was kind of settling back into a bit of a groove, and was mentally saying, okay, let's make the changes to deal with, some past injury issues, and let's get back into the proverbial swing of things. And then when the pandemic hit, it was just like, took the rug right out because not working. And it wasn't, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that I was dealing with great levels of financial stress. I'm a bit of a pack rat in some ways, so I don't tend to spend a lot. So that way I had set myself up reasonably well to be able to, as needed, do some saving stuff. So I didn't get into too much stress that way. So I'm fortunate. Lots of supports from family, of course, and the one contract did continue to pay, but it was sort of a blessing and a curse because they paid me enough so that I couldn't access the CERB. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
So what was the limit? Was it about $1,000 the cutoff?
Yeah. So I was getting paid, for like 8 hours a week. And that was, but because, that meant that I made too much.
Working 1 day a week.
Yeah.
Don't qualify.
Yeah.
That's too
exactly.
much.
So, yeah. So, and so there was, but I wouldn't say that was the bulk of my stress. It was just the what the heck? Where is this going? What are we doing? And then I am sure, like a lot of people, settled in for the long haul and just said, all right, well, and oh, wow, there's 4 hours of watching TV, streaming something. And
it's pretty conservative, actually.
Like, holy man. Well, that was in one shot.
Yeah.
luckily I was meeting. I would walk to meet Sarah at her work and walk her to work and walk her home. So those were a few things to get out of the house, and but it did take me a while to find a bit of a groove. Honestly, I'm fortunate with my current role, like the new position. I work in an office, but in an office within a big community fitness facility, or rec facility. And so there's a nice indoor track. I've got some kettlebells that I've brought in, and so I just generally do a bit of training on lunch, and then I'll do a bit of training at home because I've got a decent setup for the basement, as long as I don't put myself under the wrong floorboard or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What
It works well. So
was there much confusion for you guys trying to implement any new protocols or figure out where you stood in the pecking order in terms of who had to close when they had to close, who could open when they were supposed to open, and whose job was it to, I mean, how much of a role did you have to take in designing / implementing proper protocols to actually get you guys, or get the new facility that you're working at, COVID safe, so to speak?
well, I haven't been particularly involved at all yet, at the new position, because of with my starting kind of end of September, they had already implemented most of their protocols to get things going. There was a period where they were, I'm pretty sure, entirely closed. Yeah, because everybody was closed for a while there, right?
About
Yeah.
March, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Mid-March.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the new facility, once they got things going, so that was before I arrived. So I will be, I will be heavily involved in setting up some of the programming that connects with the local health authority. So it'll be some programming there. So that's going to be, there is some stuff in place, but it'll be modifying some policies and procedures and emergency protocols, and what kind of class limitations, just especially given the population that these programs do involve. So, but back in Penticton before I left, that was, I had written up like a reopening or restarting proposals, and but again, I wish I could. I personally, I wish I had more feedback, because I could actually have used that coming into this new position. But honestly, it was a one-way street. It was sending out proposals, getting nothing back information-wise, and that's honestly went on for 5 months. Yeah.
To be honest, I think bureaucratically, that's how a lot of things work. Is you're required to write some sort of proposal to basically do your due diligence, and okay, we're gonna make sure that everything runs smoothly, but then no one reviews it. It just gathers dust, and no one ever reads it.
The only thing we were told is you can't open.
Right.
So yeah, and now again, I should add to that this was not a private facility. This was not a private fitness facility. This was not out in the public. This was so in their defense, it is a fitness facility or a fitness room connected with in the inpatient psychiatry unit. But the thing was, we were only wanting to have access for those inpatients. Mm-hmm. So it was frustrating, because we knew we weren't able to support the individuals in ways that, would have, we would have been able to, I think, safely. And I don't say that in the, the protocols are too strict or whatever. I say that I think it was just, they just decided they put a foot down and said, no, we're not going to open in such a manner just because.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Life goes on.
Yes, it does. How do you feel about the whole narrative about whether or not fitness gyms that sort of thing, should be considered an essential service, which is a fairly binary, sort of statement. Is it or is it not? Whereas I think that there's definitely circumstances, and there's lots of different facets in which we engage in physical activity that aren't restricted just to fitness gyms. So like there's this spectrum. So do you have any comment on that?
Oh, I mean, I have my opinions on things, and they don't necessarily
Oh, I get it. You don't want to rock the boat.
go with what everybody says. Personally, I'm not honestly a gym person. Even as like a personal trainer, as somebody who has worked for 12, 13 years with individuals dealing with chronic disease. I personally will encourage gyms. I will encourage getting outside. I encourage physical activity. I don't necessarily, I don't get as stuck on the fitness and exercise. That does not mean to say that I don't think that fitness and exercise is essential. I am willing to accept that, yes, it can be done safely, but there are a million and one ways to be physically active that don't necessarily include a group of people going into a small space. Now,
so you would agree with me that physical activity is not quite the same thing, maybe culturally or perceptively, as exercise, quote unquote.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I mean, honestly,
for those listening who maybe have never really thought of a difference.
Yeah, and I mean, there are, there in the books they give definitions to physical activity, exercise, fitness, and then like skill and performance, and I always think there are things that we can do. So the thing that frustrates me a little bit, and everybody's rightful to their own opinion, and that is absolutely fine, and people don't have to agree with me. But I find it a little bit when people talk about wellness and then get it conflated with actually like being at a gym. That to me is not wellness. Wellness are the people that I see walking down the street with their partners along the river. That's wellness. That's mental health. That's, yes, I get that you can get those things as well but it's not this like exclusive thing where the only way that you can get the mental health benefits of exercise is to do it in a gym.
Yeah,
that's where
it's very similar. It's very similar and reductive as saying that you can find mental health and improve your fitness through rowing, but you can't do it through cycling. Like drawing a line between the two when really they accomplish the same thing. They're just different modalities.
Yeah. Just now, I should add that, I mean, I have this wonderful ability to say I am currently in a role that I'm fortunate to not be as heavily impacted by these restrictions. So you can say, well, it's easy for me to say that it's not my gym being closed or whatever, and that is totally true. But I would also say that I have said this from March when I was out of work. My opinion hasn't changed on the restrictions. My opinion hasn't changed on physical activity and wellness just because the pandemic has, put me out of work for 6 months. I still have that same feeling. But yes, I mean, I do currently now, I am in a role that does allow me to say, oh, well, it doesn't impact me that much. But I still think physical activity, being well, are not exclusive of going to a gym. And I think that there are tons of benefits and opportunities for people to branch out in their wellness. that don't necessarily involve getting together in a big group and
Yeah.
doing triple sets with your buddies.
Yeah. I obviously I have an obligation to where I work to make sure that revenue's coming in and we're paying the
Mm-hmm.
bills and our employees are
Sure.
getting paid. But I tell members all the time, mainly the ones who I think just need sort of like a mental reframing, and for those specifically who I really try to get into the habit of separating my clients into the appropriate categories in terms of what things I need to deliver to them that will help them the most. So, trying not to treat everyone as a nail if I'm a hammer sort of thing, but there are
Mm-hmm.
certain people who have enough trouble just going to just getting out of the house. Those are
Mm-hmm.
not the people who you need to worry about the best program, which of course is sort of like a fallacious idea anyway.
Yeah.
But oftentimes they'll ask you, what should I be doing? What's the best program? This and that. And it's like, you just need to get out of the house. Like, that's your biggest hurdle right now. So for
Yeah.
those people, I tell all the time, you don't have to come to the gym. It's just a convenient place for you to reach your goals. If there's another thing
Yeah.
that you can do, then you got to explore those options.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is always what's the exercise? What should I do? And you just sort of want to say like, well, the best exercise is the one that you're going to do.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's the one that you're going to enjoy, because that's going to be the one that you're actually probably going to get the best combination of, exercise, conditioning, maybe strength, depending on what it is, but as well that enjoyment, that engagement side of things. Going to do exercise and feel like every time you walk in it's pulling teeth because you don't like what you're doing is not really going to be, a thing. Or, if you think that the only way you can be fit is to run, and running causes you various levels of stress, maybe even pain, but you keep doing it because that's the modality that has been
Well, Charlie,
ingrained
you,
in
you
you
can't
or
get to that
whatever.
runner's high unless you push through that pain.
Yeah, I know. The runner's high, that the elusive runner's high that
you
I don't think I've
you can't
ever
get that
experienced.
adrenaline going until you push through that pain.
Yeah.
It's the necessary evil.
Yeah.
Would you say in your experience that the perception that exercise needs to be unpleasant is something that you encounter often? And maybe this might be
Yes.
demographic specific.
Yeah. I mean, I would say yes. That is definitely, there is part of that. There's the whole uh, the beauty of suffering side of things. There's that
The nobility.
glorifying. Yeah, right. There's the glorification of suffering and that, which obviously, like, who am I to sit here and say, I'm not going to pass judgment on people who, feel like they need to go into a gym and suffer, because I mean, we suffer when we train, right? But at the same time, uh, that's not personally, that
It's
is
not the end
not.
goal.
No, it certainly isn't. And I mean, as far as my general clientele, quote unquote, I do typically work with an older population, a generally an older um, population that is dealing with chronic disease. So for me, it tends to take a very different approach. People do, I mean, even from that, like, I will still hear, 75-year-olds who have COPD and, have had heart attacks and say, well, no pain, no gain, right? And it's just kind of like, no, I always try to reframe it, and, I'll accept discomfort, but we're not looking for pain. I don't want to hear about, I don't want to hear about you telling me about how your knee was swollen up for 3 days after you, did a jog on the treadmill. And even though I only asked you to walk,
Mm-hmm.
and, but, I get that. Obviously, I think that there is a bit of that desire, and especially there's maybe some of that goes along with that time constraint that a lot of people deal with. So it's like, well, I don't want to go do something for an hour, or maybe I don't have time to do something for an hour. But if I can go in and just crush something for 15 minutes, the problem with that is I think where that oftentimes catches up with us or doesn't come out in the wash is, you can go and do some hot, super high intensity thing for 10 or 15 minutes. But more often than not, depending on what you're doing, that super high intensity is maybe going to have some other effects on us, because of the movements that are going to be involved. So hey, maybe if I go for, let's say, if I go for an hour bike ride, you know, um, personally, I don't really feel the need, other than maybe starting a little slower and then taking a few minutes at the end to cool down, quote unquote. I can just go and ride for an hour, or even go run for an hour, give or take.
And would you say
But
that
with the
if you
high
were to,
intensity, you got to warm up, you got to cool down
yeah,
and do those recovery modalities, or that stuff's really going to catch up with you.
yeah.
You were going to say, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna jump in there on the whole, just going out for, again, that physical activity, just going out for like a run or a bike. How much is it about the workout, and how much is it about just getting outside for you? What
Oh,
really is the
yeah.
bigger part? For me, I would say it's getting outside. Like if I'm going for a bike or run, uh, if I'm not in the gym, it's the whole purpose for me doing that is going outside, and enjoying my environment and
Yeah.
getting that fresh air. Sometimes it's also about trying to give certain areas of the body a break. Like if I'm going for a run, it's
Yeah.
usually because my shoulder's acting up or something like that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, um, I definitely appreciate the going outside and being outside, and quite often the physical exercise that I'm doing in that moment is just sort of it's like, it might be the reason I'm going outside, but it's just, instead of me going out and laying out on a chair for an hour, it's me going out and going for a jog, or going to do sprints at the soccer field across the way, or going. So I will use those as opportunities. Yeah. So instead of, or more appropriately, it's instead of doing a 30-minute air bike ride in the basement, it's, I'm going to go outside and go ride for an hour, or go
Mm-hmm.
ride or go run for an hour, because I
Yeah.
want to be outside and be out in that.
And in the back of
Um,
your head, you know that you're going to hit a comparable sort of energy demand in terms of total area under the curve, but that's kind of just like more in the back of the head. The fact that you're just getting out there and able to enjoy it, that
mm,
really is key um, for getting that sort of duration out of that activity. Because hopping on the bike for half an hour and really pushing it, that's just not something that's, as much as we do voluntarily um, undergo suffering. That's there's you. Sometimes it's a bridge too far. I ain't doing half an hour on the bike. I'm not sure if I have in the past. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I don't know if I've done half an hour. Not hard anyway. But
on the air bike, you mean?
the air bike, yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, I've done some hours.
Oh gosh,
I mix
I
it
know
up
you would.
though. Mix it
You
up.
got to find some way to push that engine any higher. Um, but Yeah, and oftentimes going outside for a bike or a run is a way to kill time too. I know that I wouldn't say I struggle with it, but I know that Rachel, for example, she has a background where we both came from a background of being a little heavier, and so sometimes we, again, not struggle with food, but it's hey, it's hard not to think about food when you're an athlete. That's the other thing. And so anything that I can do to bridge the gap between meals and not get that sort of eating out of boredom sort of thing happening, then I'll
Hmm.
definitely explore those options. I did want to come back around to the whole perception of unpleasantness when it comes to physical activity. And you specified that, or you brought up one um, point where you think that a lot of it has to do with sort of this cultural thing of um, that there's some glorification or nobility in suffering, and I guess maybe in some instances, people are just looking for that really big face punch of a level of feedback that if they don't feel like they get that feedback, that really strong feedback from what they're doing physically, then they feel like they're not getting a lot of results that are sort of commensurate with that feedback. Now, the other thing that we talk about in kinesiology or sports science is, or psychology even, is when people have that initial bad experience with something, it's hard to shake off that bad experience. And I wanted to know what level of experience you have working with individuals where they have this mental barrier or aversion to something. Let's say maybe you guys use a treadmill to do cardiovascular testing or training in your facility that you work in, but maybe someone had a bad experience on a treadmill, and it doesn't matter if you ask them to walk or run. It doesn't matter what level of exertion that you ask them to do. They just always associate that piece of equipment with a bad experience. How do you, and that's just an example, but do you ever find yourself in those positions where you have to figure out how to get people to retrain their brain to be more accepting of those things?
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, so I haven't had a lot of that, say, with the younger population that I have worked with. There are a few people that have had some experiences and were they were very quick to have very similar reactions. So, and this was like one individual I think of, it was like every time we would go and we would push, it didn't matter what we were doing. Every time we would go and we would push hard. This was a young guy, 14, I think, really active kid. And we were doing the same things. I've been working with him for years. I think he was actually probably about 15 or 16 at this time, but I've been working with him since he was probably like 13. We had great, really good rapport. We'd made a lot of success. Like he'd gotten a lot stronger, and basically just because I got him working on doing some different stuff.
Was there a specific reason or a clinical outcome that you guys were working towards?
Honestly, not particularly. He's just a fit kid, and he liked to ski, and so he wanted to. There was a few things like This was a young guy who had some neuroatypical aspects. So it was a bit of kind of like a stimulation thing. It was to get him doing something new and to give him something to focus on. And he was a lot of fun to work with. It was good for me to work with an individual, in such a way. I had done some in the past. I worked in the Child Development Center, so I have worked with kids with various levels of maybe on that spectrum. So it was a lot of fun, and we had a lot of fun. But so this was a kid. So I think there was also that connection too, that he was very quick to having that very same stress response that he had. He'd had an injury after he came back. He was very quick to that stress response. And it took us a while before he was able to get through that. And we had to make some major changes in terms of going, okay, well, we needed to, even though physically he could comfortably handle the stress or the work output that we were doing, the intensity, it wasn't about physical capacity. It was that neurological response and that stress response that he had to that feeling of internal stress. And he had that same reaction. And it was, whether it was a heavier lift, whether it was some kind of a push hard on a bike, whether it was a push hard on the rower, it didn't matter what it was. Same kind of stress response.
Do you think it was probably more tied to like his heart rate?
It was definitely, he was pretty much like stimulating that like vagus nerve, and he was having these repeated bouts of hypotension. Um, and so it was just taking a lot of, so we had to retrain his dealing with that stress. I have, and dealing, same thing. I have a lot of, on the other end of the spectrum with a lot of the older individuals is, they feel something similar to what they felt when they had their heart attack. And so that's something that that we would need to work on. So for me, it was always there. It was okay. Well, we're going to exercise and we're going to tick off a bunch of boxes. So it was giving them the confidence to say, okay, well, all right, you're feeling a heaviness in your chest. All right, well, let's go through a checklist. Your heart rate's fine. Your heart rate's regular, palpating it. Your blood pressure's fine. Like it's, well below any typically dangerous threshold. Your color's good. These things, right? So we would go through a bunch of check boxes and then they would say, okay. And I would say, well, let's just slow it down and build their confidence via, that. So going, okay, well, I see when I slow down, that feeling went away. And then so we would gradually build up and we would, just increase that amount of time it took for that, or the amount of intensity it took for that same kind of feeling to come back. But again, it was always tied in with, that was one thing that I was doing. I was checking blood pressures and heart rates and oxygen saturations constantly with those individuals in my program for that purpose, was just to be able to say, I get, tick off these boxes. Hey, look at this. Everything looks pretty darn good. We're not seeing anything clinically that says, now granted, I'm not doing like a running ECG or things like that, but, as far as those easily measurable ones, we were able to build confidence that way and get people feeling more confident. I've had people who, in their stress test, they barely lasted a minute and a half on the treadmill because they had the highest level of anxiety in the stress test, but also just walking on the treadmill. Mm-hmm. Like I had, and I mean, within 3 sessions of cardiac rehab, I had these people, this one in particular, doing, 3 or 4 times the intensity that they achieved in their stress test. But not because they I didn't take them to some world-class level. It's just that they had such a stress response being on a treadmill that, I had to build through that anxiety and that stress.
Was this was this an older subject?
This person was in their 50s.
Did they have like a fear of falls or anything like that? Or were they prone to falls? Anything of that sort?
You could just see her. It was like this particular individual, you could see when she was on a treadmill, it was like somebody who was not very good at running code was running code. Because just the way that in like a robot, it was like somebody learning how to manually, and like very, very stressed, like so much tension, and you could just see it within her movements. And then, like I say, 3 or 4 sessions in of building some comfort levels and practice, and she was like, just chugging along on the treadmill. And it was just getting through that stress and anxiety. And
that's one of the most important and unfortunately often overlooked aspects of pain that I think that people who aren't trained in it, though they work in the industry, it's just a really big oversight, and that pain really starts to shut down your movement, your motor ability in terms of just execution, but also the coordination itself. It really interferes with those signals. And there's a few names in the strength and conditioning world who have been criticized particularly of really ignoring sort of the pain science aspect of, there's sort of that mindset of like, again, the not necessarily no pain, no gain, but like suck it up buttercup sort of thing. But it's like, if someone's that tense, it doesn't matter what cue you give them. it doesn't matter what piece of equipment you give them. Like, you got a long road ahead of you to try and clean that up. Firstly, by trying to get rid of the tension. Because if you can't get rid of that, then their movement patterns aren't going to clean up because they're not really able to engage them.
Yeah, especially, I mean, given certain activities, of course, right? Like different exercises, it's definitely show up. I mean, if you've got tension and you're doing some form of like dynamic type movement, those things are never going to clean their way out just because that's not how they work. They don't move. You need that tension relaxation kind of pattern.
Oh, yeah.
You need that controlled, but like chaos, right? And if you can't do that without letting go, then it's like watching people do swings and they're slow and they're lowering the kettlebell down, right? And you go, well, I mean, if somebody has that would be a thing that I see from people is, let's say the kettlebell swing. Ding! See, I said kettlebell, so that now.
Perfect.
But yeah,
we have a minimum quota here.
Yeah, so I think that type of a movement is a pretty apt one in terms of, because a lot of people who are new don't get the idea of, you're not supposed to, you're never supposed to, throw a weight. You're always supposed to control it, right? And then same thing, people are like, oh, I've got back pain, so I'm really controlling it. It's like, okay, but that's counterintuitive, not only to the movement, but actually you're putting your back under a greater level of stress because you've got this weight projected out in front of you for a longer period of time under a greater level of actual force through those points where, your back is probably at a greater level of risk.
Yeah.
Instead of taking it, catching that absorbing that weight and that, the impact of the bell going down in the deeper portion of the swing back, you're trying to control that. Yes, granted, a slower and a probably lower force, but over a huge, way longer moment, and increases that stress. Yes.
And yeah, the moment that you said, the whole contract, relax thing, my head went immediately to kettlebells. But yeah, I would definitely say that, and I've thought about this briefly before, but if there's one thing that kettlebells has really entrained me to do really well, it's just really entraining that tension relaxation sort of thing, and just being able to stay looser for a greater amount of time as I'm doing any sort of given activity. And it's really almost a practice of doing that whole bullet time matrix thing where everything just kind of slows down and you're able to assess your environment a lot better, because you're not just sort of like that hyperactive dog that's like squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. Yet everything just like slows down. You're able to assess your situation a lot better.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I agree. I mean, I would say, I have a bit of a tendency to be that ADHD in a training session, but with that, it's almost like that's just outside things that are going on because I've done so much of this. It's my first competition was December or November 2010, right? So it's been a long road, and you get some of those those aspects ingrained, and I agree absolutely. I mean, I think for me it also has like taught me to be able to learn how to just like turn that conscious brain off, which is the big part of being able to find that tension relaxation, is not having that conscious thought process of, okay, I need to flex now, and now I need to release. It's like, no, you just do. It becomes this automatic action. And that's where, you can see when a person's, that's why we're also good at sprints and not so good at grinds, right? Because in a sprint, you just shut your brain off and you just do the thing for 30 seconds or a minute.
You just run that code and go.
Yeah. And if you've got it nicely ingrained, those are oftentimes, the best sets, right?
Yeah.
They're like, it's like, whoa, that felt, yesterday I was training and I did this set of 10 reps with the 32s. And that felt so much easier. It felt so good compared to the set that I had done before. That was like 6 reps. But it's just because in the one where I did 6 reps, it was like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm working my way through. And whereas with the one at 10, it's like, I'm just bang, just go, go, go. It wasn't a sprint, but it was also, and of course it's well above my capacity, but it's just, I wasn't consciously going through the positions. It was just mechanically hit, reset, go, hit, reset, go. And so those are the things I think that's where those are some of the things that I would have definitely benefited from, and where, you kind of learn how to deal with different levels of stress and handle different movements and just be able to turn your brain off and just work.
So now we're sort of talking about the tunnel or the zone or whatever people sort of call that, where you get into that optimal level of both arousal and confidence, I guess. I forget what word they usually use, but what would you say for you? What do you require to hit that optimal level of arousal where it's just enough stress, but not too much, where you're in that zone and you're able to kind of just really enjoy the ride? And specifically with kettlebells, or specifically with like a particular lift, what needs to be there in terms of speed, in terms of the bell? Like, do you mind? I'm trying to run a podcast here.
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, like I always like that a little bit of that feeling. I like to have a bit of a nervous energy for one. I don't. It's just for whatever reason, those are when I feel the best in terms of my lifts. Just enough of that nervous anxiety, a little bit of excitement, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But it's always that excitement where I always say it's like the thing about kettlebells.
That's one thing I notice about you, Charlie, is that look of excitement on your face all the time.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways,
but, it's always that like level of nerves, because it's not nervous because you're worried about whether or not you're going to survive, or you're worried about, am I going to hit this PR number? It's the nerves of like knowing what you're going to go through in the next 10 minutes. Because everybody who's done a 10-minute set, especially if you've done enough of them where you just know, okay, at 5 minutes, this is what's going to start feeling, and at 7 minutes, this is what's going to start. And it's like, you just know, and you hope in the back of your mind, or there's a small part of you in the back of your mind that says, don't let those feelings overcome, what you're willing to do physically in terms of that. So don't let that discomfort in your feet. And so there's always that little bit of like, who's going to win this battle? Is it going to be the discomfort, or is it going to be me? And so there's always that, maybe a little bit of nerve. But I also like that because it reminds me and it tells me, I find those little things, I become very obsessive in terms of where do I feel stretch? When I'm in the rack, what should I feel? Well, I'm looking for a few cues. I'm looking for a stretch through my traps. I'm looking for a tensiony stretch feeling in my hip flexors. It's things like that. It's trying to tuck the chin, and it's all these sorts of goofy things that are just my little cues that remind me to get into the position that I need to be able to be, have the best pattern coming out of the jerk. So it's all about just that feeling of being like under just enough stress to be able to perform the lift, and not so much stress that, you're getting drugged around by the weights, not so much stress that your muscles are feeling, just slow and drugged down by. And so that's where, some of the different things that I'm working on with my technique stuff are coming in. And it's just, trying to find that point where I can move with the highest level of, pop in the jerk and with the most level of counter kind of action in the clean and trying to shut my brain off in between.
And of course, none of this is by chance. I would have to posit that by and large, if you're feeling those negative feelings or those feelings like you're sloppy or you're not hitting your positions or things aren't going well, there was usually something that happened before you even got up on that platform, or to rephrase, things that didn't happen before you got up on that platform that are causing that. So you didn't put in a good training block. You didn't get a good night's sleep, or you haven't been watching your hydration or nutrition, that sort of thing. So as I like to say, a pinch of prevention is worth a pound of cure, sort of thing. So, or in this case, performance.
For sure.
So, and coming back around to that little sort of itch of excitement. And I'm sure that you felt this, but this is a really tough dragon to chase. And it's that when you have that really good training block and you're training towards maybe a pace that you've never really done before, and you do sort of have a personal goal in mind, or maybe it's worlds and you're like, okay, this is going to be the best set I've ever done. And you get up there and you know that you've had the best training block that you've ever had, and you're not sure what you're going to put out, but you know it's going to be good. That sort of excitement. Have you felt that before? Don't be modest.
Yeah. I mean, I've had it in different sets. I would say biathlon has been a struggle for me for the last while. And that's been one where personally, I wish I could say more, but yeah, I've had sets like, say, when I competed in Victoria, 2014 Victoria. That was a set where I knew, and it felt great.
I remember that. That was, as I recall, one of your best sets, or maybe your best set.
That was my best jerk set with 32s. I mean, it was my best snatch set too, but I think the problem with that, it was one of those things where once I did that jerk set, I probably didn't do as much as I should have to prepare for the snatch set, because I was like riding that sort of euphoric wave of, hey, I just did exactly what I wanted. And actually, not only did I do it, I didn't have to get into that like real junk. It was like, not only was it my best set, it was also like the best feeling 10-minute set I've ever had with 32s. So it was a bit of that, and I probably didn't prepare as well as I should have for the snatch set, which, to be honest, I almost never do. But like in terms of, I almost never warm up for snatches. Mm-hmm. So I probably should have. But, I was riding that sort of that high of hitting that number. But, so yeah, and I mean, I've had some decent sets with the 32s where I don't know that I've ever felt super fantastic about what I was about to do. I mean, I felt good. And I've had some good sets. I'm not trying to say that, but with the 32s, say in long cycle, I felt I've had some really good feelings going up for a lift, say with the 24s. Definitely, and knew that, okay, I'm going to do somewhere between 105 and 115 reps today. And that's a nice feeling. And you go out and you do it and you put them down and you walk off the platform and you go,
and you're not like breathing heavy. You're just like, you just dust off your hands and like, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just feels good. You had that, right? Everything led up to that and everything came together. Of course, I've had other sets where it's like, I've stepped on the platform going, I'm going to hit, my goal here is 65. And, everything comes apart, and so I've had those sets too. And I've had those sets in relatively big, moments. And, that's less than inspiring. Yeah. So, and I mean, but I think that would be probably a level of honesty with ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, oh man, I'm going to go for 65 here and I'm going to crush this. And then, you walk off the platform and you go, I think I had an illusion within my training, because I had, maybe some sets here and there. And, maybe we kind of build ourselves up on shorter sets and lots of volume that we then in our own heads extrapolate to, well, I did this and well, that should come out to this.
Mm-hmm.
But, as we all know, that's not really how that plays out more often than not.
Yeah. And what you do in training, of course, won't necessarily correlate as long as there's always all of the other life factors that are coming into play. We can't just bank on what we're doing in that single hour per day sort of thing, or whatever the case may be. Coming back around to the whole warming up for snatch. When I'm if I'm not if I haven't taken a bunch of months off or anything, I generally with the 24, I just go up there. But when I started doing some more competition sets with the 28, I remember in Everett or Seattle, at the Northwest, I went to go grab a coffee or something, and I came back, and it's like, oh, I'm up on the next flight. And so I had no chance to even warm up to the 28 because, I mean, generally speaking, that whatever you're doing, that the more demand, the heavier the weight is. Generally, the more potential warm up you'll need. If it's lighter, obviously you're not necessarily going to need any warm up if it's light enough. But my norm at that time, and I hadn't done a lot of 28 kg snatch sets, but my norm at the time was in between that 135 to 140 range with the 28. And I went up there and I think I pulled out 124. So in terms of, and normally I had historically at that point always warmed up before doing my 28 kg snatch and wasn't rushed or anything. So in terms of a reduction in reps, wasn't really that much. I mean, certainly that's enough to take you off the podium, but I wasn't disappointed with it at all. So
I know for myself, I mean, as you said, with 20, but I can look at the way, and I mean, you would say, and anybody who's done, as you go up in weight, it's not, especially with the lift like snatches, it's not nearly as much of a cardiovascular issue, right? Like doing 20 reps a minute on the 24, it'll get your heart rate going, right? Because you're always kind of moving.
Mm-hmm.
Doing, whatever, 13 to 15 reps a minute on the 28. Yeah, that'll get your heart rate going. But depending on, it might not get it up as high as maybe the 24 because you're sitting overhead longer. So you're not moving as constantly. So you get a bit more of that rest cycle. Mm-hmm. With the 32s, maybe you're doing 10 to 12 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes, 10 to 12 RPM. Now that has its own that has its own stress, right? Personally, at the end of a 24 set, if it's 200 to 230 reps, I feel other than my hand feeling like it's, a vice grip and maybe skin, deciding to give way just because of the friction and that pacing, you feel pretty good, right? You feel maybe out of breath, but you don't feel.
It's like going for a run at your good pace. And then you come back and you're like, oh, that was a good run, but it's not like I'm wiped.
Yeah. Whereas with 28s, the 28 is now heavy enough for me, and not having particularly flexible shoulders and not having a really great overhead position, it's stressful to hold that bell overhead. So if I'm doing the best sets are the ones where I'm going like when I was training hard and I was going upwards of 20 RPM, those were the sets that felt the best with the 28
Mhm.
because I'm spending the least amount of time overhead.
I couldn't
32s,
have said it better because that was something that I figured out early on too, was that I get my best sets when I'm going 20 RPM. If I go
yeah,
slower, it's just I do not have the terminal elbow extension or shoulder mobility
no,
to really hang there.
no, that's the same. Like the only time I've ever done a full 10-minute set was the 32 in snatches. I think I did like 110 reps because I had to just survive,
Hmm.
and it was like move my hips out of the way in any way possible to be able to hold the bell overhead. Like my best set with 32s, I think was about 9 minutes and 10 seconds. And that was me going faster than, you know, probably a pace. Now I get that it's only another, basically a minute, but that minute at the end is the hardest minute. Unfortunately, we don't ever get to add the minute at the beginning of the set. It's always at the end of the set.
Hmm.
And that's the thing, right? That's the hardest part about it. But yeah, like with 32s, I definitely, and with 28s, personally, it's more of just a feeling. So it's getting opened up overhead. That's where I will feel like, okay, the warm up has a place. Not because I need necessarily a cardiovascular warm up. It's more of just for me, honestly, before snatches, it's am I hydrated? Do I have energy? Especially if it's after a jerk set, and then beyond that, like those are the worst sets that I've had are because I was dehydrated because I didn't have like, fuel after a long day
Yeah.
at the Olympia. That was the big one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I bombed like totally just bombed out at
I
the end in my set.
yeah. Oh, I have those pictures of you sitting in the corner there, just like sweating your ass off.
Yeah.
Like, ah. Um, but you didn't you do that head to head with some sort of Russian guy with like you were lifting those? Were you lifting white bells?
No, you mean at the Olympia?
Yeah, the Olympia.
No, see that was a trick, and I made sure that came out because what those were improperly painted bells, and those were 28s.
Suspect.
Yeah, so they were 28s, even though like because they didn't get the
These
bells,
feel
so
amazing.
they had to like they just had people bringing in bells, right? And they were
Yeah,
actually they were
yeah.
28s. But they were painted white
For
because there
those,
was this one club in California that had all their kettlebells painted green, and so they
oh,
were just it didn't matter what weight, they were all green, and then then I think they like had a bunch that were painted white, some other clubs. So yeah,
weird.
those are 28s, and that was actually just another American guy. I mean, there was, yeah, I don't think there was anybody else in that one. Yeah. Yeah.
For those who don't know, was this 2014 as well?
That was 2014. Yeah.
Yeah,
For
2014
sure.
at the
Yeah.
Olympia Expo, Olympia, the bodybuilding competition. The AKA held what sort of event was it?
Well, they did,
World Cup or
it was like
something? It
yeah,
was part
World
of the
Cup,
Grand
or I
Prix
can't
or
remember what
something
they
like
call
that.
it, Grand Prix. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And there had been some sort of hiccup with sourcing their bells, or they had bells that didn't. I don't know what happened,
Make
but
it.
they had to call around to local clubs and see if they could borrow bells.
Yeah.
So, and that was very last minute.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, keeping in mind that was, now they weren't big teams, but
There was
there
a good
was,
amount of
there
Ukrainian
were
lifters there.
Ukrainians. Well, there was the Ukrainian team, there was the Russian team, and there was the Kazakh team,
Yeah.
Team from Kazakhstan. And I mean, again, they were relatively small teams, but
And then there was
there
also
were,
all the ice chamber girls were there.
oh yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, definitely. Like there were a good number of competitors.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely led to
There's
a bit of stress.
yeah, stress and shortage and whatnot.
There was like 6 bells in the warm up area, and
One more thing before we go here, just because I have another appointment at 10, is just on the topic of we're kind of talking about platform performance. How much does it factor into your performance, the other people who are on the platform with you? So I know that for me, if there's someone who is kind of at my level, who in terms of like, not if I'm up there with 24s, not someone who's up there with 16s or something. Although, well, let me rephrase. So like Carissa, for example, if she's up there, I know she's kind of like top dog for her demographic. And so if she's up there with me, that really pushes me because I see someone pushing themselves, sort of thing. So it doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with the weights. But how much does it factor into your get up and go when you're on the platform? Who else is on the platform with you? Because I know that you've lifted alongside Dennis before and some other guys, but sometimes you go to a competition and like you're the only guy up there with 32s.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say the only time it really gets me is when I'm not as mentally prepared. Um, in most circumstances, I personally I zone out everything. I don't really follow. Now that's probably to the detriment. I mean, I know that there's been competitions where, in Ireland, I mean, in Ireland, I felt pretty good and I just grooved my way through a set and finished like whatever 4 reps or something off of the platform or off of the podium, I should say, right? Um, and maybe if I was a little bit more aware and had thought to turn my head and have a look, maybe that would have given me a little bit more, okay, let's see what we can do here.
Yeah. But I guess at the very least, what you're saying is that generally you feel like you'll probably do like your expectations, but if maybe there's cause to sort of do a little bit more than that, if the situation is right, if there's, if the right incentive is there, then you can go a little bit above your 100% sort of thing.
That would be, yeah. But at the same time, there's probably other times where the fact that I am very single-minded when I'm up on the platform for the most part, that there's other times where I don't get caught up in the stress of everything else that's going around, and I just keep doing my thing. Like I know that there are sets where you might get taken by, a loud cheering crowd, and that might push you over a threshold, because stress is good. A bit of adrenaline is good, but that's also a good way to, start pulling too hard, to start over gripping on your cleans or on your snatches. And, so there are sets where I know that I have just like stoically gone away and, these are in like the high level in North America events, but not, these performances wouldn't be like first place overall in international, but in high level in North America, there are sets where I know that I just stoically ground out and beat everybody else, just because, I didn't get caught up with, the excitement of the crowd where I might, if I were to get caught up with that, like I said, you start pulling a little too hard, and that's all it is. I mean,
it's definitely not necessarily one of those sports where you can just go for it. Like there's a certain degree of you got to get within yourself and really tune into just those little feedback signals, like the little bit of stretch or pressure in your fingers as you're holding the bell. Like if you just go full tilt, like you can't really tune into that feedback loop.
No, especially early, right? Like if you start pushing outside of that, what your body is used to, before probably 7 minutes, you probably won't last, and that's the thing. Like that's my biggest thing is it's all about finding those points in the first 5-6 minutes. And then if I'm feeling really good, then it's like, okay, these last 2 minutes, I'll open up. But if you try to do anything where you're like, oh, I feel fantastic in the first couple of minutes, then it's like, that's probably gonna, those 3 reps that you gained in the first 2 minutes might be you putting the bells down a minute early. Mm-hmm. Might be you, having to survive at the end because you were rushing and all those things. So, I try to, it's all, honestly, as much as possible when I am trained, it's all you just go through, trust the process, hold the pace, and then, if you've got it, then you maybe sprint it out at the end kind of thing. But, you just don't get ahead of yourself.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a great little chit chat. We covered a lot of ground there. We talked a little bit of what's going on in our lives, a little bit of kinesiology stuff, a little bit of kettlebells. So, yeah, it was a good time had by all.
Yeah, you got it.
Anyways, I'm going to try and get this guy. I don't have to do much editing here, but I'll try and get this posted ASAP. And I'm trying to get back to the swing of posting some more content because I've been really dragging ass on that stuff. But it'd be nice to do this again in the not too distant future if you're up for it, and I'll try to give you as much notice as you need before we do that. Not like this one.
Yeah, it's all good.